Jesus died at the cross. But where was he during the 3 days before he rose again?
His body was sealed inside this tomb, but the Bible reveals something far more mysterious about what happened next.
Did Jesus descend to the dead? Did he proclaim victory to imprisoned spirits? Or is the truth deeper than we imagine? Jesus had died on the cross. But where was he during the 3 days before his resurrection? The Bible tells us what happened to his body. But what about Jesus himself? Between the cross and the empty tomb lies one of the most mysterious moments in the story of Jesus. First, we must begin with what the Gospel accounts clearly tell us. Jesus' body was placed inside a newly prepared tomb. A great stone was rolled across the entrance.
For the world outside, it appeared that Jesus' story had ended.
But the disciples did not know what the next 3 days would reveal. Peter carried the pain of denying Jesus.
John carried the memory of standing near the cross. Mary carried the sorrow of seeing Jesus die.
None of them could see what God was doing beyond what their eyes could see. The tomb was silent.
The stone was unmoved. His body remained in the tomb. But Scripture invites us to ask a deeper question. What happened beyond the visible tomb? The Bible gives us several clues, but it does not give us a complete map.
Some passages speak directly, while others have been interpreted in different ways throughout Christian history. So we must separate what Scripture says from what tradition imagines. The first fact is simple. Jesus truly died.
His death was not symbolic.
The Gospel accounts present his death as real. His body was taken down and carried to the tomb. The body was physically buried.
And the tomb was physically sealed.
Matthew adds that the tomb was later secured with a guard and sealed stone.
The visible evidence pointed to one conclusion. Jesus was in the tomb.
But the Gospel story does not end with what human eyes could see. The question of where Jesus was becomes more mysterious here.
Christians have asked this question for centuries.
One of the most important clues comes from the first letter of Peter. Peter says Christ was put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit. Peter then speaks of Christ making proclamation to imprisoned spirits. But the passage does not give us every detail of what that proclamation meant. That is why Christians have understood this passage in more than one way. Some understand it as Christ proclaiming his victory to imprisoned spirits. Others connect it with Christ's descent to the dead. Others emphasize his victory over the powers of evil, rather than a physical journey through a place. The important point is that Scripture presents Christ as active, not defeated.
His death was not the end of his authority.
To understand this, we return to Jesus' final words. Jesus spoke words of trust, even as his earthly life was ending.
He entrusted himself to the Father.
His death was not presented as a defeat outside God's purpose. He died, but the story was moving toward resurrection.
Even at the moment of death, signs surrounded Jesus' passing. The earth itself testified that something extraordinary had happened.
Yet the body remained behind the stone.
The visible body was in the tomb, while the mystery of Christ's state after death remained. This is where the words of Jesus to the repentant thief become important. One of the criminals turned toward Jesus with a plea. He asked Jesus to remember him when Jesus came into his kingdom. Jesus answered with a promise of paradise. Jesus spoke of being together in paradise.
That promise has shaped Christian reflection on what happened after Jesus died.
It suggests that death did not separate Jesus from the Father's purpose. But Scripture does not describe this realm in the detailed way modern imagination often does. So we should resist the temptation to invent details the Bible does not provide. Instead, we follow the clues Scripture actually gives. The first clue is that Christ truly died. The second clue is that his body was truly buried. The third clue is that the tomb was secured. The fourth clue is that Christ's story continued beyond physical burial. Peter's words about imprisoned spirits point to activity beyond the visible world. But Peter does not explain every detail of that proclamation. That distinction matters. Later Christians developed different explanations of what Christ's descent meant. Some traditions speak of Christ descending to the realm of the dead.
This should not automatically be confused with the popular image of hell.
The biblical language is more complex than the images often shown in movies. The central theme is Christ's victory. Death
did not have ultimate authority over him. The tomb held his body, but death could not hold the Son forever. Chant. Now the story returns to the Sabbath.
The day after the crucifixion was a day of silence.
Jesus' followers were afraid and confused.
Mary remembered where Jesus had been buried.
The tomb remained sealed.
No human hand had opened it.
The guards had one task: keep the tomb secure.
The religious authorities feared that Jesus' prediction about rising might be remembered.
They had asked Pilate to make the tomb secure until the third day. Matthew specifically describes the stone being sealed and the guard being posted.
Everything visible said the tomb was secure. Then the second night approached.
Inside Jerusalem, the disciples still struggled to understand Jesus' promises. Jesus had spoken about rising again, but grief had made the promise difficult to grasp.
He had told them that the Son of Man would rise.
Now they waited, without knowing how the promise would unfold.
The disciples had heard his words many times.
But now they could only see the sealed tomb in their minds.
The second night passed.
The guards remained at their post.
Inside, his body remained where Joseph had placed it.
But the mystery of Christ after death cannot be reduced to the physical location of his body. The New Testament speaks of more than what the eyes could see.
Peter describes Christ as made alive in the Spirit.
He also speaks of Christ making proclamation to imprisoned spirits. The passage is mysterious, and Christians have debated its meaning.
We should therefore present the interpretations honestly, rather than pretending Scripture says more than it does.
Whatever interpretation we follow, the cross remains central.
Christ's death was for the salvation of humanity.
His burial was real.
His victory was not cancelled by death. And resurrection was approaching.
The third day was drawing near.
The hours passed.
The long night was ending.
Morning was approaching.
Mary prepared to return to the tomb. They expected to find Jesus' body still there.
They did not yet understand what the third day would bring.
The journey began in darkness.
But the earth was about to shake.
A violent earthquake accompanied the dawn.
Matthew describes an angel coming and rolling away the stone.
The stone was moved. The guards were overwhelmed by what they saw.
Meanwhile, the women were still approaching.
Then Mary saw that the stone was gone. They hurried closer.
The tomb was empty.
The messenger told them that Jesus had risen.
The place that had held Jesus' body no longer held it.
The mystery of the 3 days had reached its turning point.
She ran to tell the disciples. They have taken the Lord! The tomb is empty!
Peter and John ran to see for themselves.
John reached the tomb first. He entered and saw the burial cloths.
The body was gone. They returned to Jerusalem with questions.
Mary stayed behind.
Then she encountered 2 angels.
Then Jesus himself stood near her. At first, she did not recognize him.
Mary. Then
He called her by name.
She knew that Jesus was alive.
Go now, Mary, and tell the others what you have seen.
The one who had been buried was now speaking to her.
Yes, my Lord. I will tell them everything.
The 3 days had ended with a living Christ. So where was Jesus during those 3 days?
His body was buried in the tomb. But the New Testament also speaks of Christ in spiritual terms after his death.
Peter speaks of Christ being made alive in the Spirit.
Peter also speaks of him making proclamation to imprisoned spirits.
Exactly how this should be understood is debated. But the passage does not portray Jesus as powerless. It points instead toward his continuing authority and victory.
The resurrection confirms that death could not hold him.
The tomb was temporary.
The risen Christ was the final answer to the grave.
Jesus had also promised paradise to the repentant criminal.
That promise reminds us that Jesus' relationship with the Father did not end at death.
His final words were words of trust. His earthly body would enter the tomb. But his story was moving beyond what the tomb could contain. Scripture gives us mystery here, not a detailed travel itinerary. That is why responsible teaching must distinguish Scripture from later imagery.
Many later traditions developed vivid images of Christ's descent. But those images should not automatically be treated as direct biblical descriptions. The biblical center remains Christ's death, burial, and resurrection.
Mystery points toward victory rather than defeat.
The 3 days form the bridge between the cross and the resurrection.
Friday brought death and burial. The Sabbath brought silence. Then the third day brought resurrection.
The stone was rolled away.
The body was gone.
And the risen Jesus appeared to his followers.
The disciples began to understand.
The one they had mourned was standing among them. He showed them that he was truly alive. He explained that his suffering and resurrection fulfilled the Scriptures. The resurrection transformed their understanding of the cross. Peter's fear would become courage.
John would become a witness to the events.
Mary would always remember the morning she saw the risen Lord.
The tomb was no longer the destination. The risen Jesus now led them toward a mission.
Their story had moved from grief to witness. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations. The message of the resurrection would reach the nations. Witnesses would carry the message beyond Jerusalem. The men who had once been afraid would become bold witnesses. The woman who had come expecting death became one of the first witnesses of resurrection.
The grave had not been the end. The cross and resurrection belong to one story. His death accomplished what the resurrection revealed. The stone that once sealed his body became a witness to his victory. The linen remained. But Jesus was alive. The mystery of the 3 days had led to the most important morning in history.
The one who had entered death had emerged victorious. The cross was not the end of Christ's mission.
It became the beginning of their witness.
Peter would carry the message to others. John would preserve the testimony.
Mary would carry the memory of the risen Lord.
And the disciples would proclaim what they had seen. Jerusalem had witnessed the cross. The garden had witnessed the empty tomb. Galilee would witness the continuing presence of the risen Jesus.
And the message would travel farther than anyone imagined.
The testimony would be remembered and written.
The apostolic witness would preserve the central events. Jesus died. Jesus was buried. Jesus rose.
Jesus appeared to his followers.
And Jesus sent them to bear witness.
These are the facts at the center of the gospel story.
Beyond these facts, Scripture leaves us with a mystery.
Peter speaks of Christ proclaiming to imprisoned spirits.
Jesus speaks of paradise.
Other passages speak about Christ's victory over death. Together, these passages have inspired centuries of Christian reflection.
But faithful interpretation begins by respecting what Scripture actually says.
We do not need to invent details to make the mystery powerful.
The empty tomb itself is powerful enough.
The resurrection is the decisive answer.
The disciples witnessed the change.
They saw Jesus alive.
They heard him teach. And they were sent to the world.
3 days changed everything.
Friday brought the cross.
The Sabbath brought silence.
Sunday brought resurrection. And resurrection revealed that death had not won.
The risen Christ became the center of their testimony.
Their fear was replaced by faith.
Their grief was replaced by hope.
Their questions were replaced by witness.
The mystery of the 3 days remains deep.
But the message is clear.
Jesus died.
Jesus was buried.
Jesus rose again.
And his followers became witnesses. Where Jesus was during those 3 days remains partly mysterious, but his victory over death is at the heart of the gospel. If this journey helped you understand the mystery between the cross and the resurrection, stay with Giesu for more biblical stories. Subscribe to Giesu and support the channel as we continue exploring the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Thank you for watching.